This was one of the most powerful and influential intelligence services of its time. Its network enveloped practically the entire world, advancing the interests of the Communist Party on all continents.
The agents of this agency were so effective.
Stalin knew much more about the military activities of his allies, such as the USA, France, and Britain, than they knew about the Soviet army as a whole.
In this video, I will introduce you to the activities of the KGB.
You'll learn the history of the formation of this agency and the path it has taken from the Cheka to today's FSB, how Lenin and Dzerzhinsky paved the way for terror, killing hundreds of thousands of people on the path to power, how Stalin turned the intelligence services into an instrument of repression, how communist agents operated abroad, and how Soviet-Russian pocket agencies work to this day. It was 1917 when the February Revolution began in Russia, which ended with the fall of the monarchy in the Russian Empire and the construction of democratic Russia.
But it didn't last long, because in 1917, Lenin arrived from Switzerland to Russia with communists, and they have some sign with Germans that they need were to carry out a coup to get Russia out of World War I.
And then in October 1917, the October Revolution takes place, bringing the Bolsheviks to power. But part of the population simply didn't accept the Soviet authority. Everyone expected that after the coup there would be gatherings and the people would choose a normal, legitimate government for themselves. But no. This is how the Civil War began, because officials simply did not submit to the communists and did not follow their orders. It was a kind of sabotage and a way to express dissent. And where there is dissent, there will always be a risk of counter-revolution, especially in such unstable times.
So the first task of the new government was to find ways to suppress dissent and permanently crush their desire for disobedience.
So on December 20th, 1917, at the initiative of Lenin and the secretary of the Russian Social Democratic Party, Bolsheviks, Felix Dzerzhinsky, the Cheka, All-Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage, was created. The tasks of the Cheka were as follows: to prevent and eliminate all counter-revolutionary and sabotage attempts and actions throughout Russia, wherever they appeared.
In short, to fight opponents and dissenters within Soviet Russia.
In addition, agents also performed the role of intelligence and counterintelligence, and the new intelligence service was headed by one of the initiators of its creation, Felix Dzerzhinsky, the ideologist of the Red Terror, who was given the task of creating this Cheka.
The first and the most important problem was the personnel, because forming an organization is one thing, but recruiting good personnel is another, and it's a challenging task.
Initially, there were ideological communists among them, experienced underground workers and revolutionaries, and experience in fighting was the basis from which the organization was subsequently formed. If we talk about the Bolsheviks themselves, then among them there were very few fighters. The majority showed themselves well in conspiracy and encryption.
And there was a third, the most ruthless layer, punitive squads.
They mostly took criminals, sadists, and former military personnel who distinguished themselves with particular violence during the war. They were not shy about inventing various methods of torture and interrogation. One of their favorite methods was torture with rats. A pipe was taken, a rat was thrown into it, one end was sealed with metal, and the other was applied to the human chest. Then the pipe began to heat up slowly, and the rat, trying to save itself, simply gnawed through the person's chest.
You need to understand one thing, because these executioners in the future played one of the key roles in the further formation of the Soviet intelligence services.
Gradually, the Cheka began to penetrate all spheres of citizens' activity. And it was not only about the common people, but also about the country's leadership. They monitored everything, paranoidly fearing betrayal or dissatisfaction with the new regime.
And when they realized that, they were gradually beginning to control all processes in the country. A document appeared that practically legalized mass killings.
Agents were allowed to take extrajudicial measures against unfriendly agents, speculators, wreckers, hooligans, counter-revolutionary agitators, and German spies were shot on the spot.
This document marked the beginning of a terrible terror and struggle against dangerous elements. In other words,
political rivals of Lenin, they didn't disappear, and were among the first to feel the power of the Cheka as left-wing social revolutionaries, because they had significant influence on broad popular strata. They believed that the Cheka should have some legal norms and lawful grounds for arrests rather than detention for an imagined threat.
So Lenin changes that.
On July 6, 1918, a 20-year-old head of the Cheka's Department for Combating International Espionage, named Yakov Blumkin, killed the German ambassador, Count Wilhelm Mirbach. The twist was that Blumkin was a left SR, making it the perfect opportunity for the Bolsheviks to accuse them of attempting to end the war with Germany.
And so, power finally concentrated in the hands of Lenin and his circle. But also, it didn't solve all the problems.
Accordingly, the USSR is being created, and it is necessary to restore connections and show your position in the world to prove that you are still the same Russia.
And relations with Germans, English, and other nations began to be established.
But the next question arose: how to deal with states where people in power have blood on their hands? The Kremlin quickly solved this problem.
The Cheka was replaced by the GPU, signalizing to the Western world that we have changed it and we are ready for cooperation.
That GPU was led by the same Felix Dzerzhinsky, which didn't bother anyone, and they expanded their powers, such as guarding railways and waterways. They were also tasked with combating child homelessness, rounding up children from the streets, and sending them to special schools to groom them into ideological communists. Problematic children were sent to labor colonies without discrimination.
By 1924, agents were subordinated to the police and punitive search. And now, special services gained even more powers.
Other anti-Soviet and espionage organizations in third countries became of interest, thinking about how to fight them and stir up the political situation abroad. Countries of the Middle East and Europe were primarily interested, but another special service would handle that. A talented successor to the GPU, January 21, 1924, entered history as the death of the head of the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR, the leader and father of the proletariat, Vladimir Lenin. The Union faced the choice of a new leader.
But at the time, no one imagined that a dictator would come to power.
And Stalin formed a new body in the USSR in 1934, the NKVD, not just replacing the GPU, but fully absorbing it, gaining expanded powers. Gradually, the NKVD became an instrument of control over all processes within the country. For a short time, a loyal companion of Stalin, Henry Yagoda, headed the new special service, effectively becoming the dictator's personal weapon. He created the gulags, managed the creation of the White Sea-Baltic Canal.
But they executed him, forced him to scenes that he didn't do, and lately executed him. Russia.
Henry Yagoda was replaced by Nikolai Yezhov in 1936, who would go down in history as the man who organized the Great Terror, during which 1.5 million people were arrested, 500,000 served in prisons, and nearly 400,000 were shot.
But even Yezhov didn't last long in his position.
Lavrenti Beria. He put an end to the Great Terror but continued with targeted liquidation of individuals deemed inconvenient for the regime. One of such individuals was the oppositionist, Leon Trotsky. At that time, in 1938, he was in Mexico, and according to Stalin, posed a threat to the Communist International. So, NKVD agents were sent after him. Roman Mercator, an NKVD agent, spent 2 years gaining trust among Trotsky's circle. When he finally proved himself trustworthy, he struck Trotsky in the head with an ice axe, penetrating 7 centimeters deep.
The most frightening part was that anyone opposed to communism, or worse, Stalin himself knew that they couldn't hide even abroad.
Meanwhile, the Second World War began, and the NKVD worked on 2 fronts: activities abroad and at home. First order was for partisan units, separate organizations, and saboteurs to infiltrate all cities, large and small, and to conduct extensive reconnaissance and sabotage operations there, destroying and burning communication hubs, power stations, boiler facilities, water supply systems, warehouses, fuel depots, and other objects of military economic significance.
This was especially evident on the front.
And even some units achieved great success, such as the Amtbahn unit. They killed 137,000 Germans, 87 officials, 2,000 agents, 30 tanks, and 20 armored vehicles. But within the Soviet army, anyone refusing to go into battle was shot in the back by their own comrades. It was a method of keeping their own army in check and instilling fear, lasting until 1945, the end of the Second World War, while the USSR was recovering and trying to form new alliances and negotiate bilateral relations. The Kremlin leadership removed the term NKVD from documents, erasing this stage in history as if the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people never happened. And like his predecessors, Beria was caught by a bullet.
A new organ appeared in the world, the Committee of State Security, in other words, the KGB.
The KGB became a highly specialized organization, focusing on counterintelligence and eliminating anyone who could potentially pose a threat to the USSR abroad. KGB agents and spies were among the best in the covert games of intelligence agencies. Here are the most prominent individuals and operations of the KGB. Aldrich Ames, a CIA agent who worked with the KGB. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a couple who passed nuclear bomb drawings to the USSR and were executed in June 1953. Operation Pandora, an attempt to destabilize the USA through racial warfare by instigating discord among African Americans, whites, and Jews. Operation Infection, a disinformation campaign organized by the KGB in the 1980s to spread the idea that the HIV/AIDS virus was created in the USA as a biological weapon. The Cambridge Five, the core of a network of Soviet spies in Great Britain. It was so powerful that one of its members, Anthony Blunt, became an advisor to King George VI.
And how many more were there that didn't have a significant impact? How many remain classified? No one knows anymore.
But KGB operatives were most openly active in Hungary during the anti-communist revolution. This operation was called Hungarian Uprising. Agents worked behind the scenes, tracking protest organizers and detaining them to extract information. They targeted the Hungarian leadership, prime minister, and defense minister, blaming them for leaving the country leaderless, and then moved on to activists from Hungarian parties, military personnel, and students, sending some to Soviet prisons and others to execution. In total, more than 2,500 protesters were killed, 348 civilians unaffiliated with the uprising, and over 19,000 were wounded.
The list of such stories is endless.
But the worst part is that the KGB was particularly cruel in terms of imprisonment, often cramming 30 people into solitary confinement. All of them stood in this cramped space, and when someone died, their body remained sandwiched between the others.
They didn't ignore dissidents either. They were constantly under surveillance and often hunted.
In 1978, Bulgarian Special Services under KGB guidance located writer Georgy Markov in London and killed him. He died from an injection made with a ricin-coated umbrella, a method of assassination developed in KGB laboratories.
We are gradually approaching the end of the USSR, but before that, there were a few more important events.
In 1981, Operation Ryan began due to fears of a nuclear attack from the USA. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, they decided to gather information about the American nuclear program, just in case. Oleg Gordievsky, a legend of Soviet special services who began working for British MI6, later revealed that nobody actually planned a nuclear strike, and Ryan was initiated just to calm the paranoia of the Kremlin leadership.
For a couple of years, they monitored the sentiments of the American leadership and simultaneously searched for American agents they couldn't recruit, and they found them.
Aldrich Ames, a former chief of counterintelligence at the CIA, leaked information about the workings of American intelligence to the USSR for 9 years, and for each report, he was paid $50,000, according to unofficial information.
But it's a good thing that USSR collapsed in 1991, along with KGB.
But this happened not long ago because Russia needed a new agency. No one forgot the Cold War, and the government spoke. A new independent structure was needed. So in 1995, the FSB appeared. Despite positioning this special service as independent and just, it still acts as Putin's pocket department. In 1999, they organized bombings in Moscow, blowing up residential buildings, which sparked 2 Chechen wars. In 2006, in London, they liquidated former agent Alexander Litvinenko. He had written a lot about the FSB being terrorists under mysterious circumstances. After dinner in a restaurant with acquaintances, he was hospitalized with poisoning. At the time, no one knew they would find polonium in his body, destabilizing the nervous system and causing bone marrow disruption. Clearly, the activities of the FSB are not limited to just these 2 cases. It's the successor to the Cheka, GPU, NKVD, and KGB combined, and who knows how it will all end. If you want a video about the FSB, write in a comment.